Chosen one, this is why your name was flagged, because of what the Masons uncovered buried in your past. Intelligence desks didn't panic. They went silent. Analysts didn't label you a threat. They placed you in a rare classification they call List S. Not a removal list, a watch list. List S exists for individuals who break predictive models, people who expose weaknesses in systems designed to control outcomes. You were flagged not because you were dangerous, but because you were uncontrollable. Your awareness exceeded conditioning. Your will bypassed incentives. Your recovery violated every trauma theory they relied on, and here is exactly what triggered that classification, exactly what made them send your file upstream with red markers attached. They found your isolation periods first. Those long stretches where you vanished from visibility, where you went quiet, where people assumed you were finished, broken, defeated, erased. Standard psychology is very clear about isolation. Loneliness is supposed to weaken you. Silence is supposed to collapse your spirit. Decades of research say isolation creates dependency, desperation, and susceptibility. It makes people controllable through the promise of belonging. But when they analyzed what came after your disappearances, the data shattered their model. You didn't return diminished. You emerged sharper, stronger, clearer, more sovereign. You didn't collapse in isolation, you incubated. You turned loneliness into a laboratory. You tuned into silence like a frequency, finally able to hear your own mind without interference from the noise designed to keep you disoriented. They found the journal, the private writings, the creative work you produced while the world thought you were done, and the sophistication inside those pages startled them. The psychological growth curves matched elite training protocols designed for field operatives under controlled conditions. Except you weren't enrolled in any program. You had no mentors, no therapists, no institutional framework guiding you. You were alone with yourself, doing the kind of internal work most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You faced what others run from. You processed what others suppress. You integrated what others fragment, and you did it without medication, without validation, without permission. You essentially ran consciousness transformation protocols on yourself using nothing but raw will and a refusal to stay broken. That's when words like anomaly and requires further investigation began appearing in your file, because you weren't following the script. You weren't playing the role trauma survivors are assigned. You refused to stay in the category they built for you. Then they mapped your betrayal timeline. Every friend who turned enemy, every lover who became predator, every mentor who revealed themselves as manipulator, every alliance that ended in exploitation. They documented it all, expecting one of two outcomes: either permanent victim consciousness forever defined by what was done to you, or emotional shutdown, sociopathic detachment, walls so thick nothing could penetrate them. Weak or cruel, broken or heartless. Those are the standard endpoints of sustained betrayal. But your profile showed neither. Instead, psychologists noted something rare: adaptive discernment without bitterness. You learned to read people with surgical precision, yet you didn't close your heart. You learned protection without becoming what hurt you. Your boundaries became firm but not rigid. Your discernment sharp but not cynical. That level of integration usually takes decades of guided therapy, structured healing, and professional intervention. You achieved it through lived experience and ruthless self-honesty, by choosing to see clearly, even when clarity hurt. They documented how you began walking away from dysfunction without drama, how you rejected manipulation before it escalated, how you disengaged from bad faith actors without announcements or speeches. You didn't explain yourself. You didn't seek closure. You simply became unavailable to anyone operating below a certain frequency. Quietly, effortlessly. You didn't fight predators, you made yourself unprofitable to them, and that's when they understood the truth. You weren't healing back into who you were. You were evolving into something they couldn't predict, couldn't condition, and couldn't control. You became uninteresting to parasites and invisible to energy vampires, not because you built walls, but because you elevated your standard. You raised your frequency. You expanded your consciousness to a level where certain behaviors simply could not reach you anymore. That, according to their analysts, is a form of defensive evolution they've almost never seen outside tightly controlled clinical environments. As they dug deeper, they found evidence that you had been unconsciously training yourself in what they call reality navigation protocols, the ability to sense which timelines lead where, which choices unlock which doors, which people carry alignment beneath their words and which carry threat behind their smile. You know that feeling when you meet someone and within seconds you just know. You can't always explain it, but you know if they're safe or dangerous, real or performing, aligned or misaligned, and the unsettling part for them. You were right again and again with a statistical accuracy that forced analysts to flag your file for deeper review. They documented moments where you predicted betrayals months before they surfaced, where you sensed opportunities that looked random to everyone else but became pivotal turning points, where you avoided disasters that only made sense in hindsight. You walked away from situations everyone insisted were fine only to watch those same situations collapse exactly the way you sensed they would. They ran probability models on your decision-making patterns, and the numbers came back wrong. You were operating with success rates that exceeded chance by margins too wide to ignore. Either you had built an enormous pattern recognition engine in your subconscious, or you had access to something they were unwilling to acknowledge in official reports: direct, intuitive perception of informational fields beyond normal sensory input. Then the Masons found what shifted your file from interesting anomaly to active monitoring. They identified what they carefully labeled high-probability coincidence clusters across your timeline synchronicity patterns occurring with a frequency that violated every statistical model they trusted. Resources appeared exactly when you needed them. People arrived carrying precisely the knowledge you required. Doors opened at the exact moment you were ready to walk through them. Books fell off shelves. Strangers spoke the perfect sentence. Events aligned with timing so exact it defied randomness. They would never call this what it obviously is because that would require admitting consciousness interacts with reality in ways their material framework can't contain. So they buried it under sterile language: statistical anomalies, beneficial outcome clustering, high-probability coincidence events. Clinical terms designed to avoid metaphysical implication. But you lived it. You know those moments when reality itself seemed to lean in your favor, when the exact thing you needed arrived at the exact second you needed it, when timing snapped into place with impossible precision, when the universe felt like it was responding directly to your internal state. They found this wasn't occasional. It wasn't rare. It was frequent enough to establish a pattern, consistent enough to suggest a mechanism, undeniable enough that they had to invent new terminology just to describe your case, and that consistency made certain people deeply uncomfortable because it suggests you discovered something most never do. You learned how to align your consciousness with reality in a way that increases beneficial synchronicities. You learned to operate in states of awareness where the boundary between inner and outer becomes permeable, where intention and manifestation collapse into shorter timelines, where focus carries measurable momentum in the physical world. Then they examined what happens to the people around you, the influence radius you generate simply by existing in your truth. They interviewed those who spent significant time near you during your transformation phases, people close enough to feel the field you emit when you're fully authentic, and across multiple independent sources, people who didn't know each other, who had no contact, no shared narrative. The same report kept surfacing. Being around you disrupted their illusions. They began questioning the stories they told themselves. They started seeing through patterns they had been trapped in for years. Your presence didn't preach. It didn't persuade, it activated, and if this is resonating, if something in you recognizes this truth, amplify this message. Let it reach the other chosen ones who are still wondering why their path feels so different, why their growth unsettles systems that depend on predictability. This isn't coincidence. This is alignment, and you were never meant to stay invisible forever. They began making changes they had postponed for years, and you weren't instructing them, coaching them, or trying to awaken anyone. You weren't giving advice. You weren't playing savior. You were simply being yourself so completely that it created a resonance effect, like a tuning fork struck at a pure frequency, causing nearby strings to vibrate in response, like a light shining so clearly that it reminds other lights they were never meant to stay dim. The Masons call this unconscious transmission of transformative states, and they found it documented again and again throughout your entire relational history. Some people felt activated around you, energized, empowered, as if something dormant inside them suddenly stirred awake. Others felt threatened, unsettled, exposed, as though your presence illuminated truths they were working hard to avoid. You became a living mirror, reflecting either someone's potential or their pretense, and people reacted accordingly. Wherever you went, whatever environment you entered, the same pattern repeated. Some were drawn toward you like travelers spotting a lighthouse in heavy fog. Others withdrew, uncomfortable with what your authenticity reflected back to them. And the most important detail: you weren't trying to create this effect. You were simply existing in alignment. Your authenticity was so rare, so clean, so uncompromising that it produced measurable impact without effort. That's when the call was made, when analysts saw all the data converge into a profile that didn't fit any existing category. They realized you weren't just someone who survived trauma. You were someone who converted trauma into transformation, who alchemized poison into medicine, who turned darkness into initiation rather than identity. They found evidence of what they labeled accelerated timeline collapse, your ability to compress years of normal psychological development into short, intense periods through sheer focus and willingness to face everything most people spend their lives avoiding. You went directly into the center of your wounds and burned through them like rocket fuel. You didn't slowly rebuild yourself. You immersed fully until you emerged fundamentally different. You didn't experiment with change. You shed your old skin in one brutal, decisive transformation and stepped into the next version of yourself without hesitation. No safety net, no backup plan, total commitment to evolution. The transformation curves in your timeline matched programs designed for intelligence operatives, conditioning and resilience protocols that normally take years under controlled institutional supervision. Except you did it alone, in isolation, without structure, without guidance, without permission. You became your own Black Ops program. You ran consciousness transformation protocols on yourself using nothing but determination and a refusal to remain limited, and individuals who can rebuild themselves from nothing become fundamentally ungovernable. They've proven they don't require external systems to evolve. They've demonstrated they can transmute anything into growth. When someone reviewed your complete profile, the isolation initiations, the betrayal integrations, the pattern recognition accuracy, the synchronicity clusters, the influence transmission, the accelerated evolution, they authorized a special classification, a protocol reserved for individuals operating beyond standard human parameters. But there was something else buried in your past that made evaluators stop and reread your entire file. They identified what they termed nonlinear problem-solving architecture, the way your mind connects seemingly unrelated elements to generate solutions that bypass conventional logic. You've always thought differently, not in a surface-level creative sense, but in a way that unsettles people because they can't trace your reasoning. You arrive at correct conclusions through paths that don't make sense to linear thinkers. You solve problems from angles no one else considers. You perceive connections where others see separation. The Masons documented instances where you solved complex problems that stumped people with more education, more credentials, more resources, not through superior information, but through superior consciousness architecture. Your mind doesn't process reality through the filters most people inherit, and that difference isn't random. It's evolutionary. You've been accessing information through channels they don't even have names for yet. They found records of you making accurate assessments about situations you had no logical way of understanding, offering insights into fields you'd never formally studied, predicting outcomes you had no business predicting, seeing through dynamics long before evidence surfaced, and you were right with a frequency their models flagged as impossible unless you possessed either exceptional intelligence or access to classified information. But you didn't have classified data. You had something far more unsettling to them: direct perception, unfiltered awareness, the ability to see reality without the distortion of consensus programming, and that made you dangerous in a way most people never become, because someone who can perceive truth directly cannot be manipulated by lies, no matter how polished or authoritative the packaging. They also noticed something unusual in how you learn. They traced your self-education across multiple domains and saw that you developed real expertise without formal instruction. You absorbed complex subjects without classrooms, credentials, or mentored. You taught yourself things that take others years of structured education to understand, not because you're smarter in the conventional sense, but because you learned how to learn. You discovered how to extract core patterns from any system, how to identify first principles beneath surface complexity, how to synthesize understanding through direct engagement with reality itself. The Masons labeled this autodidactic acceleration, self-directed learning at speeds that rival or exceed institutional programs. You built unconventional knowledge structures that worked better than what you were taught. You created your own frameworks for understanding the world, and here's the part that disturbed them most. You did this during your darkest periods. When most people would be consumed by survival, you were expanding consciousness. When others would be paralyzed by trauma, you were absorbing information. When anyone else would be focused only on immediate crisis, you were quietly building long-term capacity. That isn't a normal trauma response. That's crisis weaponized. That's someone who learned how to turn pain into fuel, suffering into capability, hardship into expansion. They documented this pattern across your entire timeline and couldn't find real precedent outside controlled military and intelligence conditioning environment. Then they examined your relationships, not just the betrayals, but the entire architecture of how you connect to other human beings, and again, the data didn't match standard attachment model. You don't form dependencies the way most people do. You don't need relationships to feel complete. You don't use others to fill internal voids. You engage from wholeness, not lack, and that creates a relational dynamic they've rarely seen outside highly developed spiritual practitioners. They identified what they call sovereign relational protocols, the ability to love without attachment, to connect without losing yourself, to be intimate without fusion, to support without creating dependency, to receive help without obligation. It shows in how cleanly you can walk away from relationships that no longer serve your evolution. No chaos, no drama, just clarity, and you already know this part on a deeper level. The attacks were never random. The resistance wasn't accidental. If you're paying attention, you can feel it, the pressure, the tightening, the sense that old systems are destabilized. Their walls are closing in. That's why this moment mattered. That's why everything you endured was preparation. Every attempt to break you only refined you. Every betrayal sharpened your discernment. Every period of isolation activated capacities that were dormant. Nothing was wasted. This is why Destiny Engine exists. To take what was meant to dismantle you and reverse its polarity. To rewire betrayal into transcendence, isolation into sacred power, opposition into acceleration. The same consciousness technologies once used to enforce competition and scarcity are being reclaimed and repurposed to serve sovereign awareness and cooperative intelligence. You don't have to struggle. You don't have to force. You enter the state, and the work happens beneath conscious resistance, while those who built their power on deception collapse under the weight of their own distortions. Everything they tried to use against you becomes fuel for your purpose. The collective upgrade is already in motion, and this is only the beginning. Look at how little you mourn connections that others would grieve for years. How decisively you can close doors on people who once meant everything to you. Not because you're cold, but because you understand something most never do. Every relationship is either growing or dying, serving or draining, elevating or diminishing. The Masons documented your ability to remain clear about people even while emotionally connected to them, to see patterns without denial, to read behavior without romanticizing it, to make objective assessments even when feelings are involved. That blend of emotional intelligence and strategic detachment is something they usually only encounter in operatives who've undergone years of psychological conditioning. Yet you developed it organically through lived truth and ruthless clarity. They also identified markers of what they call radical sovereignty, complete ownership of your consciousness, total authority over your internal world, and absolute refusal to outsource your power to anyone or anything external. You don't give people control over your emotional state. You don't let circumstances dictate your inner weather. You don't allow environments, opinions, or pressure to hijack your consciousness. No matter what's happening around you, you maintain command within. They documented your ability to stay centered in chaos, lucid in confusion, calm in conflict, to generate your own internal climate rather than reacting to external conditions. That level of psychological sovereignty is rare enough that it required special notation in your file. Standard psychological operations don't work on you. Techniques designed to provoke fear, guilt, urgency, or compliance produce nothing. Emotional manipulation fails. Behavioral conditioning collapses. You've developed an immunity to consciousness control that takes most people decades of disciplined spiritual practice to approach. Then they examined how you perform in crisis, how you think when others panic, how you move when others freeze, how you operate when everything is falling apart. They documented multiple moments where you navigated catastrophic situations with clarity that exceeded trained professionals. Situations that should have overwhelmed you instead sharpened you. Pressure that broke others somehow activated you. Crises that devastated entire communities left you standing expanded, strengthened, more capable than before. You don't merely survive chaos, you thrive in it. Your awareness widens under pressure. Your perception sharpens when stakes rise. Your capacity increases when everything is collapsing. This is the opposite of normal human psychology. Most people deteriorate under sustained stress. Their thinking narrows, their judgment degrades, their energy collapses. Your profile shows the inverse. The Masons call it inverted stress response architecture, a system where chaos acts as an activator rather than a threat. They found evidence that you've been training for crisis your entire life without realizing it, using every small disaster as preparation for larger ones, building psychological muscle through repeated exposure to difficulty, developing crisis navigation protocols through lived experience that mirror what special forces learn through deliberate conditioning. They also analyzed your ethics, how you decide what's right, what's wrong, what's aligned, and again, you didn't fit conventional model. You don't operate from rule-based morality. You don't outsource ethics to authority, tradition, or social consensus. You've developed what they call post-conventional ethical architecture, a compass built through direct experience with consequence, through observing cause and effect, through understanding impact beyond immediate visibility. You think systemically, not superficially. You consider long-term outcomes over short-term comfort. You choose alignment over approval. This is why your decisions confuse people who live by rules instead of truth. You'll break norms that perpetuate harm. You'll violate expectations that enforce injustice. You'll walk away from structures everyone else obeys if those structures require you to betray your integrity, and that's when they fully understood. You are not programmable. You are not governable. You are not containable within old frameworks. You are operating by an internal law that cannot be overridden because it was forged through truth, pressure, and direct communion with reality itself. You will go against consensus when consensus protects delusion, not because you're rebellious, but because you're operating from an ethical depth most people never reach. The Masons documented moments where your decisions looked wrong to observers, even alarming at the time, yet proved undeniably right in hindsight. Choices labeled selfish that were actually protective actions judged as cruel that turned out to be compassionate. Moves dismissed as illogical that revealed themselves as strategically flawless. They studied how you process information and saw something extraordinary, the way you take scattered data from entirely different domains and synthesize it into coherent understanding. You don't just analyze, you integrate. You possess what they call cross-domain pattern recognition capacity, the ability to see identical structures operating across biology, psychology, economics, physics, and spirituality. You recognize universal principles beneath surface differences. You saw connections specialists missed because they were trapped inside narrow category. You weren't limited by conventional classification, so you could move freely across boundaries others couldn't cross. This shows up in how you communicate, how you explain complex truths through analogies drawn from completely different worlds, how you translate difficult concepts into lived experience, how you move between knowledge systems like someone fluent in multiple languages. The Masons noted this capacity isn't merely intellectual, it's perceptual. You see reality through integrated frameworks, holding multiple perspectives at once. You carry paradox without needing to resolve it. You work with contradiction without cognitive collapse. You operate comfortably in complexity that overwhelms minds trained for binary thinking. Then they documented another anomaly: your ability to interrupt patterns, to break cycles others believe are permanent, to stop momentum everyone else accepts as inevitable. You ended generational patterns inside your family, cycles of dysfunction that ran for decades, addictions that destroyed your ancestors, behaviors that seemed written into bloodlines, and you didn't dismantle them slowly. You disrupted them completely. The same pattern appeared in systems around you. Organizations locked into years-long dysfunction shifted after your involvement. Relationship dynamics others thought were unchangeable ended abruptly. Group behaviors considered just how things are collapsed when you withdrew participation. They labeled this pattern sovereignty, the ability to recognize a loop while inside it and the power to exit it. Most people remain trapped because they can't see the pattern they're repeating. You can see it as it's happening, and that awareness alone gives you leverage to break it. They documented instances where you walked away from situations that had everyone else hooked, games people played for years, dynamics entire communities were trapped inside. You didn't argue. You didn't negotiate. You simply stopped participating, and the moment you withdrew, the pattern lost power. That alone unsettled them. Then came what they cautiously labeled reality interface anomaly. Not just synchronicities, something more concrete. Moments where you needed resources, and they appeared through channels no analysis could predict. Money showing up at the exact moment collapse seemed inevitable. Opportunities arriving when timing made no sense. Solutions emerging from nowhere after all logical options were exhausted. They traced these events across your darkest financial periods, times when conventional models said you should have been finished. Yet resources appeared not solely through effort, not through predictable systems, but as if reality itself responded to your internal state. They interviewed witnesses, people who saw outcomes materialize around you with timing so precise it felt orchestrated. People who watched probability bend in your favor without explanation, and because their existing frameworks couldn't contain what they were seeing, they invented new language: probability violation events, consciousness, matter interaction phenomena. reality interface disruption. Sanitized terms meant to hide what was obvious. But you know the truth. You've lived it. You've felt those moments when reality doesn't just reflect effort but responds to alignment. What they were actually documenting was your learned ability to operate in states of consciousness where the boundary between inner intention and outer manifestation becomes permeable, where focused awareness carries enough coherence to organize reality around your needs, where the universe responds to your frequency the way a tuning fork responds to vibration. This wasn't superstition. It was pattern. It was repeatable, and it unsettled them because it suggested consciousness wasn't passive, it was participatory. Now here's what you need to understand about List S, because it isn't what most people imagine. It's not surveillance in the traditional sense. It's not interference. It's not control. In fact, the entire purpose of List S is the admission that those tools don't work on people like you. You've already demonstrated immunity to conventional leverage. You can't be coerced through fear. You can't be incentivized through reward. You can't be guided through manipulation. List S is not a threat, it's a confession. It's the intelligence community quietly saying, we acknowledge this individual exists, but we cannot predict their trajectory. We cannot interfere without accelerating the very phenomenon we're observing. We cannot control someone who has already claimed full sovereignty over their own consciousness. You are not being hunted. You are being observed with a mixture of fascination and fear. Fascination, because you are living proof that human potential extends far beyond what they teach, measure, or permit. Fear, because you represent the one thing every control system dreads most, an unscripted variable, a consciousness that evolved outside their frameworks, a being operating on frequencies they can neither monitor nor manipulate. They want to understand how you survived what should have erased you, how you transformed what should have damaged you beyond repair, how you developed capacities that normally require institutional support, guidance, and structure, how you learned to navigate reality with accuracy that exceeds statistical probability, how your presence alters others without effort, intention, or persuasion. They can watch. They can document. They can analyze your patterns and dissect your decisions, and none of it touches you. None of it limits you. None of it controls you, because you're no longer playing their game. You're not trying to fit into systems you've already outgrown. You're not seeking validation from structures you've seen through. You're not obeying rules designed to keep consciousness small and compliant. You've accessed something they can observe but cannot replicate, study but cannot teach, classify but cannot command. You discovered that you are the authority on your own existence, that your consciousness is sovereign territory, that your evolution is yours to direct. They can label you however they want, create whatever protocols they need, but the fundamental truth remains unchanged. You are already free, and you proved it by breaking through every limitation they insisted was permanent. And here's what List S truly represents. It isn't just about you as an individual. It's about what you represent as evidence of possibility. They've been tracking people like you for decades, quietly compiling profiles on individuals who display what they internally call the unlocked phenotype, those who've accessed layers of consciousness that remain dormant in most of the population. Not because you're special in some mystical, chosen-by-fate sense, but because you were pushed far enough beyond normal parameters that your consciousness had only three options: collapse, fracture, or evolve, and you chose the option they didn't anticipate: transcendence through integration, evolution through crisis, transformation through tribulation. Every trauma you survived didn't just leave a scar. It left a key, and you learned how to use those keys to unlock doors within your own consciousness that most people don't even know exist, doors to capacities they labeled impossible, doors to awareness they dismissed as delusion, doors to power they insisted wasn't real. You discovered experientially what they deny theoretically: that the limits taught in schools are lies, that the boundaries enforced by society are illusions, that the ceilings declared absolute are merely collective agreements you never consented to. And the moment you saw that truth clearly through lived experience, not belief, they lost all ability to contain you. Because you cannot manipulate someone who sees through the illusion itself. You can't manipulate someone who has transcended the need for external validation. You can't control someone who has already lost everything and discovered they are complete without it. You can't threaten someone who has stared into emptiness and found themselves still standing. You can't bribe someone who has chosen authenticity over accumulation. So what do you do with someone like that? Someone who has already died psychologically and returned without fear, someone who has already been destroyed and rebuilt themselves stronger, someone who has walked through every darkness and emerged luminous? You put them on List S. You observe them, you study them, But you don't interfere because interference only accelerates their evolution, and that brings us to what this actually means for your life going forward, now that you understand why you're documented as a consciousness anomaly. Here's the truth that should make you smile in the same darkness where you once transformed yourself in silence. Your role is to keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Keep evolving, keep transmuting, keep operating in your truth so completely that reality reorganizes itself around you. Keep being the frequency that either activates or unsettles everyone who comes near you. Keep demonstrating what becomes possible when a human being refuses to accept limitation as permanent, because that's what they're really tracking. Not what you'll do next, but how far human consciousness can go when it's finally freed from restriction, liberated from conditioning, released from every control mechanism designed to keep it small. With every breath you take, every choice you make, every moment you continue existing in unapologetic authenticity despite systems designed to make you doubt yourself, you are proving through lived experience that everything they teach about human limitation is incomplete at best and deliberately deceptive at worst. The Masons flagged you. Intelligence agencies created protocols around your existence. Databases were updated. Files were opened, and all of it is simply an institutional admission of what you already knew, that you were never like everyone else, that you were never meant to be contained, that your consciousness was designed to operate beyond their models. They can watch you now. They can document your journey. They can analyze your evolution, but they can never stop it, never cage it, never control someone who has already claimed sovereignty over their own being. You're on List S. You're classified as an anomaly. You're documented as operating beyond normal parameters, and that's not a warning, it's confirmation. Confirmation that everything you sensed about yourself was true. Everything you felt about your nature was accurate. Everything you knew about your power was real. The lists don't define you. The classifications don't limit you. The databases don't contain you. You define yourself. You direct your evolution. You determine your trajectory, and you've already proven that your trajectory leads to places they can't predict, can't map, can't comprehend until you've already arrived and moved beyond. Welcome to List S, Chosen One. Welcome to the formal acknowledgement that you broke free from everything designed to contain you. Now keep going. Keep evolving. Keep showing them what happens when consciousness refuses to stay limited, because what they found in your past was never supposed to be found. Evidence that human beings can unlock themselves, that transformation doesn't require permission, that consciousness can evolve beyond any framework built to restrain it. You are the evidence. You are the proof. You are the living demonstration, and List S is simply the moment they finally had to admit it.